The knock on the door came at 6:14 a.m., a bitter January morning in 2024. For Detective Sarah Blackwood, it was the culmination of a three-decade hunt. For the residents of 1477 Aspen Drive, it was the day their carefully constructed life would collapse. Florida State Police opened up as officers swarmed the modest suburban home. Neighbors peered through curtains, stunned to see their longtime neighbor, retired school maintenance worker, respected church volunteer, and grandfather of four, being led away in handcuffs. Nobody suspected, nobody knew. But 34 years earlier, on December 17, 1990, as heavy snow blanketed Interstate 80, 19-year-old Meline Crowfeather stepped out of the warmth of the Wind River truck stop into the freezing Florida night and vanished into thin air. The daughter of a Shoshone mother and white father, Meline was known for her infectious laugh, determination to become the first in her family to graduate college, working night shifts to pay tuition. She was just months away from completing her nursing degree. Her disappearance left a wound in her reservation community that refused to heal. For 34 years, investigators accumulated boxes of evidence, followed hundreds of leads, and watched promising suspects slip away. Her family marked birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries with an empty chair till a single hair preserved in evidence since 1990 finally revealed its secrets under advanced DNA analysis. What would you do if someone in your family vanished without a trace? Would you ever stop searching? Could you handle discovering the truth decades later? The arrest shocked Florida to its core. The suspect had been hiding in plain sight all along, living less than 50 miles from where Meline was last seen. Even more disturbing was his connection to the case that no one ever suspected. If you're fascinated by how modern science is finally bringing justice to decades-old cases, hit subscribe right now to join our community dedicated to exploring the most compelling solved cold cases across America. With new forensic breakthroughs happening every day, we're witnessing a revolution in cold case resolution, and you won't want to miss a single story. Tonight, we dive into the case that haunted Florida for over 3 decades and the cutting-edge science that finally brought a family the answers they deserved. Meline Crowfeather wasn't supposed to be working that night. Her roommate had called in sick, and Meline, always willing to help, had picked up the extra shift at the Wind River truck stop, a 24-hour oasis for long-haul truckers battling the treacherous winter conditions on Interstate 80. Born on the Wind River Reservation in 1971, Meline had always been exceptional. Her name-soaring eagle in Shoshone seemed to predict her determined spirit. The middle child of 5 siblings, she stood out for her academic prowess and quiet leadership. While her brothers excelled in sports, Meline found her calling in the classroom, earning straight A's despite the challenges of reservation schools that were chronically underfunded. She had this way about her, recalls her older sister, Janet Moons. When Meline decided something was worth doing, nothing could stop her. Not poverty, not discrimination, nothing. By 19, Meline had defied considerable odds. She secured a partial scholarship to the University of Florida's nursing program and maintained a 3.8 GPA while working night shifts to cover expenses. Her professors described her as extraordinarily dedicated and bound for success. Her plan was clear: finish her degree, return to the reservation, and address the critical shortage of healthcare professionals serving Native communities. December 17, 1990 began as an ordinary Monday. Meline attended morning classes, studied at the library until 4 p.m., then drove her beat-up 1980 for Honda Civic to her apartment to change for her unexpected night shift. Security footage later recovered from the bank across the street captured her arriving at the truck stop at 6:48 p.m., bundled against the gathering storm, and her distinctive blue parka with fur-lined hood. The Wind River truck stop sat isolated at exit 152, a sprawling complex featuring a diner, convenience store, shower facilities, and a small motel annex. During underfunded, she had this way about her, recalls her older sister, Janet Moons. When Meline decided something was worth doing, nothing could stop her. Not poverty, not discrimination, nothing. By 19, Meline had defied considerable odds. She secured a partial scholarship to the University of Florida's nursing program and maintained a 3.8 GPA while working night shifts to cover expenses. Her professors described her as extraordinarily dedicated and bound for success. Her plan was clear: finish her degree, return to the reservation, and address the critical shortage of healthcare professionals serving Native communities. December 17, 1990 began as an ordinary Monday. Meline attended morning classes, studied at the library until 4 p.m., then drove her beat-up 1980 Honda Civic to her apartment to change for her unexpected night shift. Security footage later recovered from the bank across the street captured her arriving at the truck stop at 6:48 p.m., bundled against the gathering storm in her distinctive blue parka with fur-lined hood. The Wind River truck stop sat isolated at exit 152, a sprawling complex featuring a diner, convenience store, shower facilities, and a small motel annex. During winter storms, it often became an impromptu community hub as travelers waited out dangerous road conditions and suggesting she might have accepted a ride from someone due to the blizzard. On the reservation, however, the reaction was immediate and forceful. Within 24 hours, family members organized search parties that combed the area around the truck stop despite continuing harsh weather. Community members printed flyers and distributed them across 3 counties. Tribal elders led prayer ceremonies, while younger members took to the newly available internet message boards to spread word of the disappearance. "We knew right away something was wrong," said Thomas Crowfeather, Meline's father. "My daughter wouldn't just walk away from her car, her job, her education. Something happened to her that night, and we weren't going to wait for authorities to take it seriously in those first crucial days, while the broader public remained largely unaware." Two distinct investigations began, the official police inquiry hampered by jurisdictional questions between county and tribal authorities, and the family's relentless, desperate search. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. We were fascinated to see how far Meline's story has traveled and how different communities respond to cases like hers. Your perspective matters to us. The first 48 hours of any missing persons case are critical. For Meline Crowfeather, these hours were squandered in a bureaucratic tangle that would haunt investigators for decades. When the truck stop manager called the Fremont County Sheriff's Office at 7:13 a.m. to report Meline missing, the responding deputy classified it as a walkaway, suggesting she had left voluntarily. This initial categorization, despite her car and belongings left behind, would set the tone for what followed. They kept saying she probably caught a ride with a trucker, recalled Doris Whitaker, the manager. But anyone who knew Meline knew that was ridiculous. She wasn't impulsive, she was responsible. The deputy collected basic information and promised to keep an eye out, but no detective was assigned for 3 days. No crime scene technicians examined the employee exit or parking area. By the time investigators realized the seriousness of the situation, the crime scene had been contaminated by foot traffic and weather. When Detective Ray Hawkins was finally assigned to the case on December 20th, he faced a significant challenge determining which agency had jurisdiction. The truck stop sat near the boundary between Fremont County and the Wind River Reservation, creating confusion over whether tribal police, county sheriff's deputies, or the FBI should lead the investigation. "We were getting bounced between agencies," said Janet Timoons. The tribal police said it happened off reservation land. The county said they needed federal resources, and the FBI said they needed more evidence of foul play before committing resources. This jurisdictional ping-pong consumed precious time. While authorities debated responsibility, the Crowfeather family took matters into their own hands. Thomas Crowfeather, Meline's father, organized volunteers into search teams, conditions and suggesting she might have accepted a ride from someone due to the blizzard. On the reservation, however, the reaction was immediate and forceful. Within 24 hours, family members organized search parties that combed the area around the truck stop despite continuing harsh weather. Community members printed flyers and distributed them across 3 counties. Tribal elders led prayer ceremonies, while younger members took to the newly available internet message boards to spread word of the disappearance. "We knew right away something was wrong," said Thomas Crowfeather, Meline's father. "My daughter wouldn't just walk away from her car, her job, her education. Something happened to her that night, and we weren't going to wait for authorities to take it seriously in those first crucial days, while the broader public remained largely unaware. Two distinct investigations began, the official police inquiry hampered by jurisdictional questions between county and tribal authorities, and the family's relentless, desperate search. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. We were fascinated to see how far Meline's story has traveled and how different communities respond to cases like hers. Your perspective matters to us. The first 48 hours of any missing persons case are critical. For Meline Crowfeather, these hours were squandered in a bureaucratic tangle that would haunt investigators for decades. When the truck stop manager called the Fremont County Sheriff's Office at 7:13 a.m. to report Meline missing, the responding deputy classified it as a walkaway, suggesting she had left voluntarily. This initial categorization, despite her car and belongings left behind, would set the tone for what followed. They kept saying she probably caught a ride with a trucker, recalled Doris Whitaker, the manager. But anyone who knew Meline knew that was ridiculous. She wasn't impulsive, she was responsible. The deputy collected basic information and promised to keep an eye out, but no detective was assigned for 3 days. No crime scene technicians examined the employee exit or parking area. By the time investigators realized the seriousness of the situation, the crime scene had been contaminated by foot traffic and weather. When Detective Ray Hawkins was finally assigned to the case on December 20th, he faced a significant challenge determining which agency had jurisdiction. The truck stop sat near the boundary between Fremont County and the Wind River Reservation, creating confusion over whether tribal police, county sheriff's deputies, or the FBI should lead the investigation. "We were getting bounced between agencies," said Janet to Moons. "The tribal police said it happened off reservation land. The county said they needed federal resources, and the FBI said they needed more evidence of foul play before committing resources. This jurisdictional ping-pong consumed precious time. While authorities debated responsibility, the Crowfeather family took matters into their own hands. Thomas Crowfeather, Meline's father, organized volunteers into search teams. Women in Colorado claimed her ex-husband had confessed to killing a native girl near a highway, but recanted when confronted by FBI agents. Each false lead, each dashed hope took its toll. The worst part wasn't just losing Meline, Thomas explained. It was losing her over and over again every time we thought we might finally get answers. The investigation's trajectory reflected broader societal patterns. Cases involving Indigenous women received less media coverage, fewer resources, and lower priority. A 1999 Department of Justice study revealed that missing persons cases involving Native American women were 4 times less likely to be solved than those involving white women of similar age. By the early 2000s, the family had adapted to a heartbreaking new normal. They maintained their advocacy while rebuilding their fractured lives. Janet eventually married and had children, naming her daughter Meline. Thomas and Sarah divorced in 2003, the strain of their shared tragedy proving too much for their relationship. Still, they never stopped pushing authorities. Every time leadership changed at the sheriff's office or the regional FBI field office, the family requested meetings to brief new personnel. Every advancement in forensic technology prompted letters requesting re-examination of evidence. Most went unanswered. The turning point came in 2008 when Janet connected with the newly formed Florida Cold Case Coalition, a volunteer group of retired law enforcement officers, forensic experts, and victim advocates. Through their guidance, she learned about familial DNA searches, touch DNA analysis, and genetic genealogy techniques that didn't exist when Meline disappeared. "For the first time in years, I felt hope," Janet recalled. Not just wishful thinking, but actual science-based hope. The coalition helped the family petition for a formal case review. After months of bureaucratic resistance in January 2010, nearly 20 years after Meline's disappearance, the FBI officially reopened the investigation as part of a broader initiative addressing unsolved cases involving Native American victims. Agent Kimberly White was assigned to lead the reinvestigation. Unlike her predecessors, she approached the case with fresh eyes and modern forensic understanding. Her first action was ordering a complete inventory of all physical evidence. "I remember her calling me after finding the evidence boxes," Janet said. "She was stunned by how much was there untested, unexplored. She told me, 'Mrs. Timmoons, I can't promise we'll solve this case, but I can promise we'll give it the investigation it should have had 20 years ago.'" The silence that had enveloped Meline's case for 2 decades was finally breaking, though answers remained elusive. The family that had refused to forget was about to discover how right they'd been to keep fighting. We want to hear your theories. Who do you think would have been motivated to harm a promising young nursing student? What connections might the perpetrator have had to the truck stop or Meline herself? Comment below with your thoughts on who might be responsible and why they managed to avoid detection for so long. When Meline Crowfeather vanished in 1990, DNA testing existed, but in a form nearly unrecognizable compared to today's capabilities. The original investigators had collected biological evidence, including hairs from her hairbrush, fibers from her recovered parka, and partial fingerprints from her abandoned car. But the technology to fully exploit these clues simply didn't exist. In 1990, we needed a blood sample about the size of a quarter to generate a DNA profile, explained Dr. Ella Romero, forensic scientist with the FBI laboratory, and even then, the results were far less definitive than what we can achieve today. The original DNA testing in Meline's case required RFLP analysis restriction fragment length polymorphism, a technique that demanded large amounts of well-preserved DNA and took weeks to complete. The hair samples collected from Meline's brush provided profiles for elimination purposes, but the single hair found on her recovered parka potentially belonging to her abductor couldn't yield sufficient DNA for analysis using 1990s technology. By 2010, when Agent White reopened the case, forensic science had undergone multiple revolutions. PCR amplification, which became standard in the mid-1990s, allowed scientists to photocopy tiny amounts of DNA into testable quantities. Short tandem repeat STR testing implemented around 2000 provided greater discrimination power with smaller samples. Each decade brought exponential improvements. Dr. Romero said tests that once required visible amounts of biological material can now be performed on cells too small to see with the naked eye. Agent White's first action was sending the original evidence to the FBI's revamped laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. Items that had been previously tested were retested using modern methods. Items deemed insufficient in 1990 were now prime candidates for analysis. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely source: a single hair found on the collar of Meline's blue parka when it was recovered months after her disappearance in 1991, and that hair was logged as unidentifiable. They couldn't even determine if it was human or animal, explained Agent White. By 2010, we could confirm it was human. By 2015, we could extract mitochondrial DNA, but we needed more. The investigation hit another wall when the extracted DNA matched no profiles in CODIS, the National DNA Database. The sample was preserved, waiting for technology to advance further. That advancement came in 2020 when the FBI laboratory implemented a new technique called forensic genetic genealogy, the same method that had identified the Golden State Killer in 2018. Unlike traditional DNA matching, which requires an exact match in criminal databases, genetic genealogy uses markers shared with relatives to create family trees of potential suspects. The technique compares crime scene DNA with profiles in public genealogy databases where individuals have voluntarily uploaded their genetic information. It's like having millions of distant cousins help solve your case, explained Linda Ramirez, The genetic genealogist assigned to Meline's case in 2021, we're not looking for the perpetrator directly. We're looking for their genetic relatives, then working backward to identify them. The single hair that had been deemed useless in 1991 now yielded enough genetic information to build a family tree. Ramirez identified several distant relatives sharing unique genetic markers with the DNA sample. Through painstaking genealogical research, she constructed family connections stretching back generations. We started with fifth and sixth cousins, then narrowed to third cousins, then first cousins, Ramirez said. Eventually, we identified a family group that had lived within 30 miles of the Wind River truck stop in 1990. The family tree pointed to 3 male relatives in the right age range who had lived in Florida at the time of Meline's disappearance. 2 were quickly eliminated through direct DNA comparison. The third man who had left Florida in 1996 and now lived under a slightly altered name in a Denver suburb became the focus of the investigation. In November 2023, agents obtained a discarded coffee cup from the suspect. The DNA extracted from it matched the hair found on Meline's parka with a statistical certainty of 99.9998%. That coffee cup closed a 34-year circle. Agent White said, from a single hair once deemed worthless to absolute scientific certainty, it showcases how persistence and evolving science can solve the seemingly unsolvable. On January 12, 2024, at precisely 6:14 a.m., a tactical team from the FBI surrounded a modest 2-story home in Thornton, Colorado. Inside slept 62-year-old Robert James Keller, known to neighbors as a retired school maintenance worker, grandfather of 4, and devoted church volunteer. Within minutes, the man who had eluded justice for over 3 decades was in handcuffs. His carefully constructed life collapsing around him, no one saw it coming. Not his wife of 28 years, not his adult children, not the community that had embraced him. Keller's arrest sent shock waves through to communities the Denver suburb, where he built his new life, and the Florida town he fled in the mid-1990s, where residents struggled to reconcile the monster now revealed with the man they thought they knew. Bobby Keller, it can't be, said Harold Thompson, who had worked alongside Keller at the Wind River School District from 1988 to 1995. He was quiet, sure, kept to himself mostly, but he was always reliable, good with repairs. Nothing about him seemed wrong. What Thompson and others didn't know was that in 1990, Keller was working as a part-time maintenance contractor for several businesses along Interstate 80, including the Wind River truck stop. According to court documents released after his arrest, Keller had access to all areas of the truck stop, including staff-only sections. He possessed keys to utility rooms and knowledge of camera blind spots. Most critically, he worked irregular hours, often performing maintenance tasks late at night when fewer people were around to notice him. He was essentially invisible, explained Agent White. Maintenance workers often are. They come and go at odd hours, and nobody pays much attention. He knew the facility's layout better than anyone, including where cameras couldn't see. The arrest affidavit revealed that Keller had been at the truck stop the night Meline disappeared, supposedly fixing a leaking pipe in the men's restroom. Security footage showed him entering at 11:40 p.m. and leaving at 2:24 a.m., minus 17 minutes after Meline walked out the employee exit. For 34 years, this footage had been reviewed repeatedly, but Keller never became a suspect. His presence was considered routine, his timing coincidental. He had been interviewed as a potential witness in 1991, claiming he saw nothing unusual that night. Investigators moved on, never realizing they had interviewed the perpetrator himself. It's the perfect cover, noted criminal psychologist Dr. Hannah Morrison. Maintenance workers, janitors, repair people, they have access and anonymity. They're functionally invisible in busy environments. Keller exploited that invisibility perfectly. After Meline's disappearance, Keller continued his normal routines for nearly 6 years. He remained employed by the school district and continued his contract work. Nothing in his behavior triggered suspicion. Then in late 1996, he abruptly resigned his positions, sold his home, and relocated to Colorado. There he rebuilt his identity with subtle alterations. Robert James Keller became Bob J. Keller. He obtained new professional certifications, secured a position with the Adams County School District, and eventually married a divorced mother of two. He became active in his local church, volunteered with youth programs, and built a reputation as a dependable, if somewhat private, community member. He crafted a new narrative, explained Dr. Morrison, not a complete identity change that would raise flags, but just enough distance from his past to avoid connections to Florida. What Keller couldn't have anticipated was how forensic science would evolve, or how a single haircut on Meline's parka would eventually betray him. The DNA match was only the beginning. Once investigators identified Keller as a suspect, they discovered disturbing patterns. Property records revealed he had lived just 0.44 miles from the truck stop in 1990. Employment records showed he had performed maintenance at 3 other locations where young women had reported being followed or harassed between 1989 and 1995, though no formal charges were ever filed. Most damning was the search of his Colorado home, which yielded a hidden box containing what prosecutors described as trophies, small personal items that had no connection to Keller's current life, but matched descriptions of belongings missing from several women, including Meline's distinctive silver feather earring that her mother had handcrafted. The community reaction to Keller's arrest demonstrated the deep psychological impact of long unsolved crimes. In Florida, residents struggled. Neighbors expressed shock that the quiet grandfather next door harbored such terrible secrets. "You think you know people," said Margaret Wheeler, who had lived across the street from Keller for 15 years. "We had him over for barbecues. He fixed my grandson's bicycle. How do you reconcile that man with this monster?" For the Wind River Reservation community, the arrest brought complex emotions, relief mixed with renewed grief. Justice intertwined with anger that Keller had enjoyed decades of freedom while Meline lost her future. He lived a full-life marriage, children, grandchildren, holidays, birthdays, said Janet to Moons, her voice breaking. He stole all of that from Meline. She would be 53 now, maybe with children and grandchildren of her own. He took all those possibilities from her, from us. As Keller awaits trial scheduled for September 2024, both communities grapple with the unnerving reality that predators often don't match our expectations. They aren't always obviously menacing or socially isolated. Sometimes they're the reliable maintenance man who fixes your leaky pipes, the neighbor who waves from across the street, the grandfather who volunteers at church functions. They hide in plain sight, counting on our tendency to overlook the familiar. What's the weather like where you are today? Drop a comment letting us know. It's fascinating to see the different conditions across our viewer community, just like weather patterns. Criminal cases can look very different depending on perspective and location. Your unique viewpoint matters to our community. The wheels of justice, having stood still for decades, suddenly accelerated. Robert Keller's arrest in January 2020 set in motion a legal process that would test both modern forensic evidence and the resilience of a family that had never stopped searching for answers. Florida prosecutors faced a daunting challenge, building a murder case with nobody based on evidence collected before most of them had even entered law school. State Attorney General Melissa Hartman personally took charge, assembling a specialized cold case prosecution team drawn from multiple jurisdictions. This isn't just about convicting Robert Keller, Hartman announced at a crowded press conference. This is about sending a message that time doesn't erase culpability, that Native victims matter, that families deserve resolution no matter how many years have passed. Pretrial motions began in March 2024. Keller's defense team immediately moved to suppress the DNA evidence, arguing that maintaining biological samples for 34 years exceeded reasonable storage timelines, and that forensic genealogy represented an unconstitutional invasion of privacy. Judge Samuel White rejected these arguments, citing precedents from similar cold cases and noting that evidence preservation had no statutory time limit in homicide investigations. The defense then pursued a change of venue, claiming Keller couldn't receive a fair trial in Fremont County, where emotions about the Crow, moving the trial to Casper, Florida, distant enough for potential juror neutrality, but still within the state where the crime occurred. Jury selection proved especially complex. Potential jurors who had followed the case through decades of news coverage were scrutinized for bias. Those too young to remember the original disappearance underwent questioning about their knowledge of recent developments. After 11 days, a jury of 9 women and 3 men was seated, including 2 Native American members, a composition that Janet Two Moons later described as the first acknowledgement that Meline's heritage mattered. The trial began on June 17, 2024, exactly 33 years and 6 months after Meline vanished. The prosecution's opening statement focused not just on Keller's actions, but on Meline's lost potential, the nursing career cut short, the family left in agonizing limbo, the community deprived of her contributions. Evidence presentation revealed how thoroughly modern science had revitalized the case. FBI forensic experts explained to jurors how extraction and analysis techniques impossible in 1990 now yielded conclusive results from minimal samples. The single hair that had once been deemed worthless became the linchpin connecting Keller to Meline. This strand contains a complete genetic history, testified Dr. Elaine Romero, holding up an enlarged photograph of the hair. It tells us with near certainty that Mr. Keller was in physical contact with Meline's clothing around the time of her disappearance, contradicting his statements that he never interacted with her. Beyond the DNA evidence, prosecutors reconstructed Keller's movements using reanalyzed security footage enhanced by modern digital techniques. Timestamps revealed that his maintenance work in the men's restroom had been completed by midnight. Yet he remained on premises for over 2 more hours, with no log entries explaining his continued presence. The trophy box discovered in Keller's Colorado home provided powerful evidence of predatory behavior. Forensic psychologist Dr. James Levinson testified that such collections are characteristic of serial offenders who derive continued satisfaction from possessing items connected to their victims. Among these items, Meline's silver feather earring generated audible gasps in the courtroom when Sarah Crow Feather identified it as her own handiwork, created specifically for her daughter's 19th birthday. Perhaps most damning was evidence that Keller had researched the case throughout the decades, maintaining digital folders of news articles about Meline's disappearance and the subsequent investigation. His internet search history revealed regular queries about forensic advancements and cold case resolution rates, suggesting an ongoing concern about eventually being caught. The defense strategy centered on timeline inconsistencies and lack of direct evidence proving Meline's death. Without a body, they argued the state couldn't establish beyond reasonable doubt that a homicide had occurred. Their alternate theory suggested Meline might have voluntarily disappeared, possibly to escape academic pressure or family expectations. This approach backfired dramatically when Meline's academic advisor and former classmates testified about her dedication to her nursing program and excitement about her future. Financial records showed she had deposited money into her savings account the day before disappearing, an action inconsistent with planned departure. After 14 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 7 hours before returning their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing in August 2024, each member of the Crow Feather family addressed the court. Thomas spoke of fishing trips with his daughter and watching her graduate high school. Sarah described the handmade nursing scrub she had sewn for Meline's clinical rotations, clothes her daughter never got to wear. Janet recounted how her children grew up knowing their aunt only through photographs and stories. When Judge White asked Keller he wished to speak before sentencing, he declined, maintaining the same stoic silence he had displayed throughout the trial. The judge sentenced him to life without possibility of parole, noting that while Florida has capital punishment, prosecutors had not sought the death penalty to avoid the extended appeals process that might delay closure for the family. Your silence, Judge White told Keller, denies this family the one thing they still deserve: knowledge of where Meline rests. That is a cruelty that compounds your crime. Outside the courthouse in the bright Florida sunshine, the Crowfeather family addressed the media. There were no celebrations, no declarations of victory, only quiet acknowledgement that a chapter had closed. Thomas, now 74 and leaning on a cane, spoke briefly. Today doesn't bring Meline back, but perhaps tonight she rests a little easier knowing he can't hurt anyone else. 34 years. 12,410 days, the span between a snowy night in December 1990 and the guilty verdict in August 2024 represents more than just time. It embodies the evolution of justice itself. Meline Crowfeather's case stands as a powerful testament to the intersection of scientific advancement, family determination, and society's growing recognition that all victims deserve equal justice. Her story bridges eras from the primitive DNA testing of the early 1990s to the sophisticated genetic genealogy of today. From the marginalization of indigenous victims to the establishment of dedicated task forces, from forgotten cold case files to national protocols bearing her name. For families currently living in the purgatory of unresolved cases, Meline's story offers both hope and a roadmap. It demonstrates that evidence preserved today, even if it appears insignificant by current standards, may someday speak volumes through technologies not yet invented. It validates the stubborn persistence that others might view as unhealthy or obsessive. It confirms that justice, while sometimes glacially slow, remains possible. The Wind River truck stop where Meline last walked still stands, though it operates under a different name now. On the wall near the employee exit hangs a small plaque that employees pass every shift. It reads simply, "Remember Meline, and now you remember her too." If this story has impacted you, please share this video with others. Every share increases the chance that someone somewhere might recognize details from another unsolved case or be inspired to keep fighting for a loved one. Justice for one family creates possibilities for others. Which cold case would you like to see covered next on our channel? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Your interest helps bring attention to forgotten cases that deserve resolution. 1.8s